This is going to be fun. As you know, ICND2 builds on ICND1 and takes a lot of the topics that you learned in ICND1 and just goes deep with them. So you learn a deeper understanding of OSPF, for example, a deeper understanding of VLANs. So it just continues to go deeper. So in order to go deeper, you have to start from a foundation, and that's what I called this lab, is rebuilding the structure. What we're going to do for the next few nuggets is go through a scenario where we're going to rebuild a lot of what we did in ICND1 and walk through that configuration. This will dust a lot of the cobwebs out of your mind, but actually, let me talk about the ground rules, right? So before I even get started in this, realize that this is the explanation of the lab. I've actually taken a lot of time and wrote a ICND1 rebuilding the network lab where I have a scenario, I have objectives that you're able to go through each and every one of these objectives. Now, my goal, my hope is that you would attempt them on your own. See, I built this structure. You're looking at a slide right now, but it's actually built in GNS3. This is the actual GNS3 lab topology that I'm going to make available to you to be able to download, and GNS3 is a free download. You're able to come in here and start tinkering around and walking through these objectives. So I would encourage you to do this on your own at first, unless it's really been that long since you've been in ICND1 and you just need a good refresher to watch me go through it, and then come back to this. So do that lab, work through it, give it your best shot, and then come back to this, and I'm going to actually walk through this lab piece by piece, going through not only the mindset of it, as in how do we logically fit all of these different pieces together, and why would a company do this, and all that kind of stuff, but also, of course, the configuration of it. Okay, so let's start off. What I'm going to do is bring up the lab, we'll look at it, and then we'll start accomplishing each objective as we go. So here's the lab. We'll work through the diagram in just a second. Let's first off look at the scenario. It says your organization has just upgraded from using non-standardized devices to a complete Cisco solution. You've been offered a bonus of 3,281 bitcoins to implement the new network infrastructure, meeting the standards outlined below. Okay, so before we go any further, this is our scenario. It's a brand new, we'll call it a greenfield installation of a new network infrastructure. Before I go on, let me mention that this lab, I've actually written many a lab for CBT Nuggets series. It's hard to write labs. There's things you just forget, you miss. So as I'm going through this, I may encounter an error. It could just be a typo or something like that. But I've been in many situations where I'll hit an objective and I actually create an impossible situation for myself, and I'm like, oh well, you can't do that. So if you ever see anything in this lab, I've actually read through it and proofread it a few times, but this is actually my first time going through it in completion. So you may see things change from now to then. Okay. So first thing is first. Before we get into the objectives, let's look at the diagram itself. This organization has two offices. You can ascertain this just by looking at where the routers are. So I can see right here is office number 1. I'll just put O1 right here, which is going to be probably their corporate office. They have one router dedicated to internet connectivity, so it's connected out here to their ISP. They have another router dedicated for a branch office. So here's office number 2. Maybe they expanded and grew a little beyond their initial office. And so looks like, just looking at the diagram, I don't know much about it yet, but this looks like a dedicated lease line or something like that. We haven't seen, but essentially we have a connection between those offices, and we're building all of this from scratch. Okay, so with that, let's look at the lab and look at our first objective. It says, okay, number 1, configure all the routers and switches with a base configuration. So what does that mean? Base configuration should include the right host name, telnet and console passwords of Nugget Love, synchronous console logging, preventing the console port from having an idle timer. And by the way, this one just is handy. So when you're on the console port, what you're typing, or I should say messages from the router don't cut what you're typing in half. Idle timer keeps it from kicking you off after you sit there idle for a while. Enable password of Cisco, so a high security environment, obviously. Prevent mistyped passwords from hanging for 30 seconds. So first off, notice how I'm writing these objectives. Very similar to what an exam would do. They wouldn't tell you what the commands are or even what the concepts are sometimes. They would just say, hey, you know what? I've run into a case where you mistype something in privilege mode and it hangs for 30 seconds. You can't really break out of it in the iOS. So So stop that. So you have to go, okay, I've seen that before. They're relying on some experience that you've had in the past to know what command would accomplish that. And then a logon banner threatening unauthorized users of dire consequences. Creativity does count. Now, what I want to do is I want to walk through these things manually, first of all. I'm trying to think of the best way to keep the console and the objectives in front of me. I'll walk through these manually, and then I'm going to show you how to just do a quick copy and paste so that we don't have to do this for every single device. So let's do this. I'm going to bring up router. I'm thinking this is my GNS3. Hang on. Bring up router 1. It's a nice logical place to start. Now. Okay, router 1 has a host name assigned, but I'm going to go through as if it didn't, just because GNS3 is very friendly, and it does it for me in many cases. Some of these will not have a host name applied. So let me do this. I've marked this window to always stay on top so that we can see our objectives down here. Again, very similar if you are a certification-focused person. On the simulations on the lab, you actually have a limited space where you can move windows around. So you'll have your config over here. You'll have a little diagram over here, your objectives that you're trying to accomplish as well. So this is very similar. So first thing, let's go into router 1. And I'm going to, as if it didn't have a host name, I would type in hostname R1, which would have changed this prompt right here to R1 if it wasn't that already. So actually, just so it's more fun, I'll do no hostname. Remove the hostname, then hostname. Oh, now I accomplished something, see? So now I'm going to go and do the telnet and console passwords of Nugget Love. So console password is configured through line console 0. There's only one console port. So I'll type that in, and we'll do password Nugget Love. But on the console port, we actually have to type in the login command as well, because logins are not required on the console port by default. Even if you put a password on there, it won't actually require a login until you type in login. Now, you can turn that off by typing no login. Very dangerous to do on especially VTY lines, because then people can telnet into your router with essentially no login required. That's not good. So I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to do line VTY 0 space good. Grief, how many line numbers do we have? Look at this. We're running an enterprise iOS version, which allows me to have 936 concurrent telnet or SSH sessions. My word, I would never dream of having that many. But keep in mind, let's just do a show do show run begin with line VTY. Not so. How about do show run? Now you can see by default every router only has 5 telnet ports, 0 through 4, that is there by default. Now, if I go beyond that, it will allow me to configure more, but very, very rarely do I see a need, especially to go to 935, do I see a need to go beyond just the norm. So hang on, let me get down here. Line VTY 0 space 4. And if the lab doesn't tell you to configure more than 5 telnet sessions, I would say it's very safe to assume 0 through 4 is your norm. So 5 telnet or SSH ports we're configuring at the same time. It says telnet and console. Okay, so telnet, so I'm going to type in password Nugget Love. Now, login is already here, but we can type it in just so we feel warm and fuzzy about it. Also, as we dive into SSH, I'm not going to configure SSH in this lab. I don't think. Maybe I will. I can't remember. But we can type in transport input and actually select what protocols are allowed. So if I don't want people to be able to allow... let me say that right. I don't want to allow people to use telnet. I can just type in transport input SSH, which now allows SSH only. Or if I want to allow maybe telnet and SSH, I could type telnet SSH. It's what protocols do you want to allow to access these VTY lines? Okay, good. Synchronous console logging. Okay, we're sweeping back over to the console port. Let's just do that quick show run again. Begin with line VTY, and we can verify. Looking good. Nugget Love, login, transport. We just put that on there for fun. Not required. So I'm going to go back into the console port because I don't like this. When I come back here and do a show. Oh, you know what? GNS3, I love you. But you're ruining my demo. So GNS3, let me just do a show run. Begin with line con. So I can see the console port. GNS3 realizes just about every human being on the planet likes this command. This, by the way, is what synchronous console logging is talking about. So with GNS3, in a lot of cases, it's going to put that in there by default. This is, again, default-based GNS3 configs when you pull it out of the box. But I'm going to type it again because I'm not complete without typing it. I'll even copy and paste it. There we go. Logging synchronous, which will, so if you haven't seen this before as a review, when you don't have logging synchronous, which is the default for routers out of the box, and you're back here, you're typing in show IP, you're typing at the end of a console, it's painful. It cuts what you're typing in half. Now, if you're there and like your bailout is to hit the tab key and it will repaint what you're typing below, but who wants to do that, right? So that's where we go into line console 0 and fix it. Right there. Okay, so prevent the console port from having an idle timer. A couple ways we can do this. By default, the timeout exec is set to 5 minutes. So I can type in no exec dash timeout, which will zero it out and no longer kick me off after I sit there idle for 5 minutes. Or I can type in exec timeout, and we can type in timeout in minutes. And timeout in seconds. So if we set both of those to 0, it's the same thing as typing no exec timeout. Both of those accomplish the same thing. Okay. Back out from here. Encrypted enable password of Cisco. So I'm going to go and type in, so encrypted enable password. So this is the password to protect the privilege mode, but I want it to be encrypted, and I should specify in the slide, encrypted in the most secure possible way on a Cisco device. So I'm going to type in enable secret, followed by the password of Cisco. Now this, people get confused with this. They're like, huh, what's this 0 and this 5? Line, what do I type in? So when you type in enable secret Cisco, let me do a show run. You'll see in the running config, it actually translates it to enable secret 5, this gobbledygook right here, which is it's actually a hash. We could call it encrypted, but it's a hash version of your password. So the reason that when you do this question mark here, I type in enable secret and you see these options, they say you can actually type in an encrypted secret. So for instance, when I'm in global config, I could type in enable secret 5 and type in the encrypted version or the hashed version of the enable secret string, because sometimes you may just have a running config from another device, right? And you're copying it. Like if I took this and used it as my template and copy and pasted it into another router, it's very handy to be able to type this in, and the router says, okay, you're not really meaning somebody has to type the password of $1, $WMB. That's not your password. That's the hashed or encrypted version of your password, right? So I'm going to type in enable secret Cisco, which I already did. Prevent mistyped commands in privilege mode from hanging for about 30 seconds. Okay, here's what I mean. So, and you know what? GNS3 may fix this for me, as I knew they did it. So let me type in IP domain -lookup. So this is the default. Jeremy over at GNS3, not me. There's another guy named Jeremy who created GNS3, has some great ideas, but he's ruining my demo. So what I'm talking about is when you on a router by default, when you mistype something in privilege mode, it thinks you're trying to telnet to a device called ASDF, right? So it's actually going to start broadcasting and trying to resolve that, and that's where it will hang for 30 seconds. But our good friends at GNS3 actually did type in this command, no IP domain lookup, which says don't try to resolve these via DNS. Don't even try and look up names and translate them to IP addresses. You only need to type this if you don't have a DNS server specified, right? So if you go in here and type in IP domain, what is it? Domain server? No, domain. What is it? Why is my brain blanking out? IP name server. Name. That's what it is. IP name server 4.2.2.2, 8.8. So this would be specifying DNS servers on my device. If I do that, then I can enable IP domain lookup, because now if I mistype something, it's actually going to go to this guy and say, hey, is that a real name? It's going to be like, no, it's a mistype. Ignore it. But for now, just to accomplish the lab objectives, I'll do no IP domain lookup. Okay. Finally, a logon banner threatening unauthorized users of dire consequences. Dire. So I'm going to type in banner, MOTD, message of the day, which is displayed for just about any connection. Now there is another one. I can type in banner login, which is good if you're actually logging into the device through a VTY line. But banner MOTD is displayed everywhere. Message of the day, always shown. So now we get this nice confusing C banner text C, where that's just what characters indicate a start and end of your message. So you can do it two ways. One, I could say maybe ampersand is what signals the start. So I'll say login and die, ampersand. And that will now be my logon message. Now, it's not going to include the ampersand. C is the delimiting character, or the ampersand just means this is the start and this is the end, because the other way I could do this is a little fancier. Banner, MOTD, ampersand, enter. And you can use any character, right? I just used ampersand because I would never use that in a login banner. And this is where you can get fancy. I mean, you could go on, online, do a search for ASCII art characters and get a little soldier up there. I don't recommend that. But and also typing in login and die is not a good logon message for corporate networks, because number one, it encourages hackers, because they're like, oh yeah, like hackers have this game to where like if you challenge them, like you put logon banner, you can't hack this, it's stuff like don't do that, right? So you want to do a nice generic bland, Google, go on Google and type in Department of Defense logon banner, right? And there's actually a great little logon, somewhere, right, online. So that would be a great one to use. For that. Okay, so now I'm going to end this message, hit the enter key, I'll put an ampersand, which now says I'm done with this message. That's why they give you this flexibility, and it sounds so strange when you get there. Good. So this I would say is now checked off. Now let's create the template for the rest of it. I'm going to open Notepad, and this is probably how I would have preferred to do it from the beginning, but I wanted to show it to you on a live device so we could talk through it. So configure hostname. So I'm actually going to do this last, and I'll show you why in just a moment. So I'm going to say telnet and console password. So line VTY 0 / 4 and login password nugget love. Right. So what I'm going to do, let me pause this so you don't have to sit here and watch me type. I'm going to fill in all of these commands. There we go. So all the commands that I need to configure these devices are sitting right here, just typed in. Now notice I have the cursor blinking right at the end of hostname, because that's the only unique command to where every single hostname will be different. Well, actually, bonus points, since these are going to start from user mode, I can even type in enable config t to where we're dialed in. Now I want that blinking cursor sitting there because I want to be able to manually type in that hostname as I get to each device. So let's bring up GNS3. We'll start off with switch 1. There we go. And now, okay, the switches are really routers with ether switch modules, because GNS3 doesn't do switches. So I'm going to come in here and just right click. Good. Check that out. So all the commands went in. Now we got some errors, and that's just because of the order of the command. I wouldn't even call these errors. They're just messages. If I type in login before I type in a password, it's going to say, hey, you can't log in until you set a password, because now I'm requiring logins, but I don't have a password. That's fine. So I'm going to now type in hostname switch 1, enter Control Z WR. So now I can go to each and every one of these devices. So switch 2, matter of fact, probably just want to enter in on a couple of these guys. Switch 3. No, you get the point, right? So I'm going to go into switch 2, switch 3, all of those things, and simply right click to paste in all these commands. Good grief, there we go. Paste in or get the highlights back in place. There we go. Back here now, paste in all these commands and switch 2. So I'm going to do this for every single device that I have available on here, and now I'm going to have the base network config put in place. Okay, that's all I want to do for this nugget, because it's going to give me time to talk a little bit about how I'm going to structure the GNS3 lab exercises. As I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to make this easy for you to try it yourself. Even after you've watched me do it, it's good for you to just give it a try on your own and see if you're able to pull it off. So here's what I'm going to do. Every single one of these labs, I'm going to create a folder called pre-configs and post-configs. So in the pre-configs, I'm going to put all the configurations that started the lab that I began with. And in this lab, really there was virtually nothing. Essentially, we've got host A, B, and C that have a base config that make them DHCP clients. Those are actually Cisco routers looking, pretending to be a PC, but they act just like one. And I have the ISP config in there because you're not going to be configuring that. All of the other ones you're going to be building on your own. So what I've done is I've taken those configs and put them in the actual lab. So this, when you run the lab, it's going to be looking in this folder for those configurations. I'm going to try and remember to put the pre-configs, hopefully I do, inside of there. The post config will be once it's said and done after the lab. So if you ever want to check your work and verify that you got it the way that it should, I'm going to put all the post configs. So I'm going to take this. And actually, let me show you this before we go any further. By the way, Keith Barker made a phenomenal GNS3 series for CBT Nuggets. So if you've got the subscription, I really encourage you to check out at least a couple nuggets from there if you're new to GNS3. But this is the topology file where it shows all of the different routers and configurations that I have in here. It also shows the iOS version that I've been using, 2691. It's just been a really stable router for me, and the version of the iOS that I'm using, you can see it's unpacked, which makes it boot faster. You're going to learn that in the GNS3 series, but all you need to do is adjust this and adjust the working directory to fit your own computer. Where do you have your iOS image, and just use the 2961, and you can reuse this topology.net, or you can build your own, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to take these at the end of each and every one of these labs. I'm going to zip them all up. So I'm going to put them in a compressed folder, and we will call this ICND1 Review Lab, and let's name it Nugget 1. And so I'm just going to increment that as we go. So this will be the first nugget. Next one, obviously, will be. Guess what the next one will be? You got it, nugget 2. So this, we'll just kind of build on these as we go through. I plan on taking about 20 to 30 minutes between these, and I'm guessing by the time it's done, this is probably going to be 4 or 5 nuggets to completely do this rebuilding the network lab. All right, good. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.